Good morning. First of all, good morning in the Central European time. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. So I would like to thank Masako and Claudio for their kind invite. I feel really privileged to be here. And as I see, Thomas is also online. So Claudio and Thomas had a bit of what I'm going to discuss today. This is a paper that I wrote, and it's being under review, but actually while preparing for this webinar, I decided to change the structure of it. So I just informed the reviewers that, the review that I will be changing it. So I hope it will be accepted. And I would like to discuss a very difficult and complex issue, which is related to media pluralism, but not in such an obvious way, because this is state aid and financing of public broadcasters. And actually, my interest about this topic was raised because of the rise of authoritarian trends in Hungary and in Poland. And these are the countries where public broadcasters play a crucial role in supporting the political forces in power. And there are many examples which show how public broadcasters influence public opinion by selective coverage and distorted remit. So, for example, they are used to question such founding values of the European Union as the rule of law. But to show you in a bit more visual way, the issue of manipulation by public media in Poland was, for example, brought to mind after the mayor of Gdańsk, so the city in the north of Poland, was murdered. It was pointed out that he had been attacked frequently, and frequently means in a mass on public television channels. Another example, and you can see it in the slide, this is an example in relation to the migration crisis at the border between Poland and Belarus. And while narrating this crisis, Wiadomości, this is the Anchor News edition, used amateur videos of a store robbery from the filming location of the Netflix series called Snabakash as an illustration of a danger from immigrants, without indicating that it was not a real life scene. And you can see this is a print screen, so this is not good quality, my apologies, but this is the print screen actually from this Anchor News, without indicating that this is not a real life scene and that it comes from a film plan. Simultaneously to the manipulation in the public broadcaster media, there are several attempts to minimize private media, especially those critical to the government. And in the slide, you can see covers of major Polish outlets saying media without choice or media without freedom. And this is a response to a very specific legislative attempt to split or to force the buyout of one of the media outlets. It was unsuccessful. However, that was the reaction of the remaining private outlets. Also, we need to note what is happening or what happened already in Hungary. There are, at least I know, about 2 complaints within the European Commission. One is on the role of Hungarian public service media and the exemption from merger control procedure of a transfer of over 400 media outlets to the Central European Press and Media Foundation, so KESMA, famous KESMA case. And the other is a complaint about state advertising being channeled to only specific government favorite media. Of course, now they are all public. And these are all real life examples, also well described and of course well discussed in the press. So that was a bit of the background. I would like to introduce the research question and actually why this research question, the background of the research question. Then I would like to discuss briefly the place of media pluralism in EU law, then turn into the specific questions of financing of public service broadcasting, and including state aid, and then turn into conclusive remarks. As you have seen, the direct inspiration comes from what is happening in Poland and in Hungary, but concerns about the role of public broadcasters are not only raised in those countries. If we zoom out, and this is confirmed by the statistics of the Euro barometers, so where it was held that the majority of respondents does not believe that their national media are free from political or commercial pressure. Over half of respondents believe that so only half believe that the national media provides trustworthy information, and a little bit more than 1/3 of respondents think that the body that oversees audiovisual media in their country is free and independent of any pressure. So I think the problem is much broader than Poland or Hungary. So why media pluralism is important, and what is the focus actually? Because we know that media pluralism is a very complex notion. By media, I understand the provision of information in all forms via non-official channels of communication. And media pluralism, of course, can be analyzed at various dimensions: macro level related to media ownership, service structures, entry costs, etc., meso dimension related to media performance, professional conduct, and of course a micro level of content. And this is where I would really like to focus, because we specifically zoom on public broadcasters. And it can also, as a very complex issue, refer to internal pluralism, understood as a plurality of voices and expressed opinions within a specific media organization, or to an external pluralism, understood as a plurality of media outlets in the broader context. Just to note, the freedom of expression is broader than the very notion of media pluralism, but it also covers issues related with the rights of journalists, their protection, and the protection of their activists. Therefore, as you can see, this is of course a very basic graph. I would like to focus on the plurality of content as it is a means to ensure the rights of citizens to be informed. And this is really the focus and the background of the whole discussion. Historically, it is of course the European Convention of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, which linked the media pluralism with the right to receive diverse information and ideas. According to Article 10, everybody has the right to freedom of expression, but it includes freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without any interference from public authority and regardless of frontiers. It was the European Court of Human Rights that, of course, interpreted this provision and considered that freedom of expression granted in the principle of pluralism plays a fundamental role in a democratic society, especially when it serves to, and then I quote, impart information and ideas of general interest, which the public is moreover entitled to receive. And the link between the maintenance of pluralism and freedom of expression under Article 10 of the ECHR had already been also recognized by the Court of Justice of the European Union, and the Court of Justice of the European Union adhered to the definition by the European Court of Human Rights to the definition of freedom of expression, to which the protection of pluralistic media also belongs. So without further ado, turning into the research question, what I would like to focus is, as the problem of media plurality is often commented upon from the perspective of fundamental rights or the rule of law itself, I would like to turn into another relevant perspective, which is that of economic law. So I would like to discuss European economic law related to market integration, national control over content, and state aid, and just to discuss how the state aid rules can be better used to protect media pluralism, and whether the problem of member states curtailing media pluralism might be addressed by rethinking the state aid rules. So starting with media pluralism in EU law, there is no explicit competence conferred on the EU to safeguard media pluralism. However, Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union mentions pluralism as a characteristic of a society that upholds the rule of law. So not directly, but media pluralism is there in the Article 2. In respect to public broadcasters, it is Article 14 on services of general economic interest and the so-called Amsterdam Protocol that constitutes the interpretative framework for limits on the competence of the EU when the member states provide funding for public broadcastings, and I will discuss Amsterdam Protocol in a moment. But as we all know, pursuant to the Treaty of Lisbon, respect for fundamental rights became a founding value of the EU, and the Charter on Fundamental Rights was made legally binding, and it is Article 11, especially paragraph 2, that states clearly that freedom of pluralism of the media shall be respected, though, again, it is not guaranteed. Article 11, paragraph 1 specifies that everyone has the right to freedom of expression, and that this right includes, inter alia, freedom to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority. So please keep it all in mind and remember the pictures that I showed you at the very beginning. No interference by public authority, right? So the freedom to receive and impart information. So this is a very complex provision, and that's why my apologies for putting it as a whole in the slide, but I think otherwise it's very difficult to discuss it. I think it also shows this delicate balance between on the transfer of competences and actually the willingness of the member states not to transfer the competence on the European Union, because we can see that the competence these are member states which are competent to provide the funding, and then what are the key words here are insofar that it is granted for the fulfillment of the public remit, and then public remit which is defined each time by each member state, provided, so again, insofar, it does not affect trading conditions and competition in the EU. So this is a provision as it stands, and I think its analysis requires probably a separate lecture on its own. While discussing the overall framework of EU law to media pluralism, it's important maybe to compare, because we have those both regimes of the European Convention of Human Rights. Of course, it's not binding on the European Union, but it's binding on its member states. And then we have the European Union regime. So the European Court of Human Rights linked the concept of media plurality to Article 10, and of course emphasized the role of the state as the ultimate guarantor of this principle. And the restriction is allowed only if it corresponds to the pressing need. In Lentia, the plurality of media was linked to the entitlement of the people to receive, again, diverse information as granted in the principle of pluralism. And the attainment of true diversity and objectivity can be achieved by providing a variety of stations and programs. So again, we refer to those different dimensions of media pluralism. But in the case concerning an Italian TV company, which in spite of having a license could not broadcast due to a no allocated frequency, the European Court of Human Rights stated that freedom of expression is the essence of democracy, and that true pluralism in the audiovisual sector in a democratic society requires, and in a positive way, and here I quote, effective access to the market so as to guarantee diversity of overall program content, reflecting as far as possible the variety of opinions encountered in the society at which the programs are aimed. So there is a link between this right to receive diverse information, to action or inaction, or the obligation to act by the state, who should guarantee this right is effectively exercised. And then if we turn to the European Union, there is a bit of a switch of perspective, because this is mostly the economic character of broadcasting that was considered by the Court of Justice of the European Union, and it is considered to be a provision of services. And there is a series of judgments, I will not talk about those here, where the court discussed the compatibility of restrictive national laws on broadcasting, retransmissions of programs, and advertising with Article 56 of the TFEU. And in those judgments, the Court of Justice ruled that EU does not allow restrictions on cross-border television services. However, the court did not proceed with further negative harmonization steps. What is important is that the Court of Justice recognized cultural policy objectives as relating to the public interest of member states, and confirmed that this cultural policy could constitute an overriding requirement relating to the general interest, which in turn justifies a restriction on the freedom to provide services. However, it needs to be necessary in order to ensure that pluralistic and non-commercial character of the audiovisual system. So we see that actually those cultural or non-economic or media-related restrictions are submitted to economic freedoms of the internal market. And one of our colleagues from Utrecht University called it anxious relation between fundamental rights and economic freedoms. This whole body of jurisprudence of the Court of Justice led to adoption of secondary legislation, and this was at first the Television Without Frontier directive. Then it was consolidated through the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, AMSD, which is right now in force. And AMSD embodies intertwined principles of free movement of services and the recognition of the country of origin regulatory authority. And it includes, of course, a number of social and cultural policy objectives. It also refers to media freedom and pluralism, but only it's in preamble. What is very interesting is that in 2016, there was in the amendment to the AMSD, the Commission proposed to strengthen the role of audiovisual regulators by ensuring that they are legally distinct from the government and functionally independent of the government, but also any other public or private body. This is a significant development, as the previous version of this provision, so of Article 30, consisted of one paragraph only. Now it includes 6 paragraphs. So really the change is significant. And why independence? Because this is always a discussion, why do we need independent regulatory bodies? So in this respect, and this is how actually I see those new requirements of independence, this is crucial to ensure the impartiality of decision-making process. Once there is an impartial decision-making which enables to treat all the economic operators equally, so then it means that this body is functionally independent. And the AMSD requires member states to ensure the systemic independence by the following means. NRAs need to be legally distinct from the government and functionally independent. And we, of course, should not take or seek any instructions from any other body in relation to the exercise of the tasks assigned to them under national law implementing union law. They should have financial and human resources and enforcement powers. So we see that this is not only independence in a very narrow sense, but also ensuring really that the decision-making process is also informed. And that those resources should contribute to the work, and that those authorities should also contribute to the work of ERGAS, or the association of those authorities. They should, the NRAs should be provided with their own annual budget, and those budgets should be made public. There should be, the national law should specify the conditions and procedures for the appointment and dismissal of the heads of NRAs, and the duration of their mandates should be also laid down. The appointment procedures need to be transparent, non-discriminatory, and again, guarantee the requisite degree of independence. There are specific conditions about the dismissal. And what is very interesting is that the directive indicates that the exercise of powers by NRAs should ensure respect for the objectives of media pluralism, cultural diversity, consumer protection, and the proper functioning of the internal market and the promotion of fair competition. Even though the majority of member states transpose the amendment, still the Commission is very silent as to whether it is functional, so not only on paper, but really in action, independence criterion is fulfilled. So this is where we stand in the more general plan. And now I hope I'm still within the time, so I will turn to discuss media pluralism and public service broadcasting and the EU state law. So as you saw, the question of on the competence of the EU and the media pluralism and the control over public broadcasters is very tricky, and there was an explicit resistance on the side of the member states not to confer the competence on the European Union. But one of the existing areas where the member states unambiguously conferred specific powers on the EU, this is the state aid control and monitoring of services of general economic interest, of course with other specific conditions. So I would like to discuss possible lines of actions related to those areas, because it's without shadow of doubt that public broadcasters are undertakings submitted to state aid principles, and the state aid is provided to them in the form of compensation for the fulfillment of the public service mandate, and is assessed under Article 106, paragraph 2. So this provision which creates a safe harbor from the application of other treaty provisions. And then if the safe harbor for any reason is not, the conditions of the safe harbor are not fulfilled, then there is still Article 107, paragraph 1, so the general state aid conditions. And then I will discuss, so I will start with Article 106 and then discuss Article 107. So the first element, this is the definition and entrustment of services of general economic interest, and the SGEIs are rooted in the shared values of the EU, and it is underlined in the treaty and in the communication. So this is this element of public interest that should be pivotal in case of public broadcasters. There is, of course, no definition of or no general definition of SGEIs, and they should be addressed to citizens or to be in the interest of society as a whole. But there is a broad discretion of member states to define the scope of, and to define what actually service of general economic interest is. But there needs to be an official act of entrustment to the recipient of the relevant state support. And in this act of entrustment, there must be a specification of the precise nature of the public service obligation, conditions for providing compensations, and the arrangement for avoiding and repairing overcompensation. So there are those elements which could be controlled by the Commission. The definition should be as precise as possible, as it permits derogation from treaty rules. It should leave no doubt as to whether a certain activity performed by the entrusted operator is intended by the member states to be included in the public service remit or not. And the definition can be formulated as a qualitative definition, as these are, of course, qualitative requirements that justify the existence of broadcasting SGEIs. And coming back to the question of competence, so we can see that there is a very broad discretion of member states in defining actually what SGEIs are. And the Commission can question this definition only in case of a manifest error. So the Commission is not competent to assess quality standards. However, there should be, and it resonates with what I said about the directive, there should be an independent body of checking or supervising the compliance by the broadcaster with its public service remit. But in the absence of such a body, then the Commission actually cannot step in. So the Commission should be more concerned by the absence of such a body than really by checking the conditions themselves, because simply they have no competence to do it. So this is the first provision of the treaty which is relevant for the assessment of public funding. The other one, this is Article 1.7, and first of all, if we discuss the cause of state aid, these are, of course, to safeguard a level playing field within the internal market, to prevent competition distortions leading to market inefficiencies. However, it could be also, and it was also used for other purposes, such as to incentivize tax harmonization across the EU, or for goals related to sustainability, climate change. And also the block exemption, the general block exemption regulation, and also which is confirmed by the Court of Justice, confirms that state aid which contravenes provisions or general principles of EU law cannot be declared compatible with the internal market. So therefore, it could be argued, at least, I mean, we need to find a case for it, probably, but it could be argued that state aid measures can be reconciled with non-economic objectives of EU law. The question is whether the same logic could be applied in case of services of general economic interest, but I leave it behind because it's a very technical one. But still, this possibility exists, and it is already confirmed within the state aid field. More specifically now, turning into existing conditions of state aid, compensation for the service does not constitute an advantage under Article 107 if it fulfills the four cumulative outmark criteria. If all conditions are not met, then we turn into Article 106 that I have already discussed. And so as you can see, I listed on the slide the first two because I find them the most relevant for our discussion. So again, there must be public service obligations that the recipient undertaking have to discharge, and the obligations must be clearly defined. So this clear definition of those services becomes really a key principle here. And then what is important, this is the calculation of the compensation, which must be established in advance in an objective and transparent manner. And the cost of a public service obligation depends on whether the consideration exceeds and the net supplementary cost of meeting the public service obligation. So I will stop here because then we would enter into a very technical discussion. But those costs must be reasonable in relation to the net cost of the public service remit, so that the public broadcaster has not been granted a real advantage, so that there is no overcompensation. And in order to check this, those funding cost-related requirements, of course, there are transparency requirements in respect to public funding, and again, they require appropriate supervision by the member states. So it is a very complex system of linked elements, but probably it's enough that one element is out, like effective and appropriate supervision, then the rest element a bit fail out as well. So these are technical, or what I would call them really state aid technical requirements. But what I also would like to discuss, and I'm finishing, is it possible, because each time this is a case-by-case verification, so each time what is verified, these are the objectives of the funding. And what is interesting is to include in those objectives really a public or societal value test. So we know it from the BBC operating agreement with the UK government, where the market impact is to be balanced with the value of the service to society by, again, an independent body. Another interesting approach, this is the German three-step test, where the key element is a clear definition of the public service mission and the proper entrustment process. So the new media offers should fulfill those three steps in order to be considered as being in a public or societal value. And again, as far as I understand I don't speak German, unfortunately. There's another country, Claudia, that I should visit for my teaching purposes. There is dispute resolution system. So there is an objective institution that should supervise whether those conditions are fulfilled. So, very briefly, to conclude, in my opinion, there are instruments at the disposal of the European Commission. This is just a question of a decision to really apply them and to verify them. Moreover, there are those new obligations as to the independence of supervisory authorities under the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. If we focus on state aid, and the state aid communication could be amended to include societal values test, to follow British or German example. And of course, the most difficult and outstanding question, it is whether it is possible for the Commission to act in respect to public broadcasters whose activity is well defined on paper, but which in practice and prima facie questions fundamental values of the European Union, so whether it will not this time violate the freedom of speech and will not impose a sort of Brussels censorship. But this is a risk. And I think this is one of the reasons why the Commission is so resistant really to start action, but I can only speculate. Thank you very much.